Perhaps the most inspired writing about the Ravi in that period comes from the poet Masood Salman, who wrote, "O Ravi, if paradise is to be found, it is you." 5 centuries later, a new urban model developed, pioneered at Agra, and it began when Babur Humayun and his brother Kamran built riverfront gardens, initially in opposition to the citadels in those locations. The gardens were not entirely idyllic given the political dynamics of the time, but they shaped the longer heritage of Mughal cities, including Lahore. What these early Mughal rulers did not know was that the river channel at Agra was unusually stable compared to those at Lahore and Delhi. The latter meandered and eventually migrated almost a kilometer away from their respective citadels. This was a time of the Great Flood of 1988, when the Shalimar bunds were breached. Residents told us that they had lost their homes and barely escaped up the railway embankment. Ravi Boatman told us that they rowed out to rescue people based on their faith in Allah and their recollections of Khwaja Khizr, the patron saint of river crossings. Low-income communities shared their water concerns and aspirations then, as they do today. And it seems to me that perhaps an important part of rethinking involves asking how these complex situations have developed over time. One also wants to know more about the river's heritage and to consider how this fascinating history and heritage can help rethink urbanization along the Ravi. Back in Shah Jahan's Lahore, garden building continued along the old river terrace, indicated in the light dashed line marking the Ravi River floodplain. Shalimar Bagh took advantage of this elevated terraced location, as did the nearby shrines of Madulal Hussain and the Bagbanpura settlement. However, modern urban development extended north into less well-drained floodplain conditions from Shalimar Bagh to the Bund Road and beyond. In fact, our survey shown here of some 300 pre-colonial sites in Lahore, of those sites, only Kamran's Baradari lies within the floodplain. And that was a product as much of human as natural causes when Aurangzeb built a massive bund in response to flooding in 1662. Question, how is this possible? The more effort you put in, the greater the losses. And the answer that they found was called the levee effect, or we could call it the bund effect, the embankment effect, where new flood protection works lead to intensified urbanization and development, reduced risk perception in what were only partially protected areas of the floodplain. Now, Gilbert suggested 3 ways in which urban floodplain management research can help enhance human and environmental well-being that might be relevant for the policy dialogue. The first was to conduct ex post evaluations of what actually happens when development occurs in the floodplain. Not what's planned and what's anticipated, but what actually happens. Secondly, to plan for unanticipated risks and hazards. And third, to try to expand the range of choice amongst planning, design, and policy alternatives that deserve consideration.
2020, when we started the authority, there was already 30 or 35% of the area that was already filled with all this unplanned population that you see as soon as you cross the motorway bridge. This had to be stopped. Now, if you have a planned city over there, we expect that if there is proper segmentation of the development parcelization that we do in our master plan, we expect that we'll have more and more investors, universities, hospitals that will be coming over there. Now, that is something I also missed about the universities and hospital. So this is actually the first master plan where we have already placed specific areas that will have the central park. So we have converted that into precincts, and each precinct will have a central park, university, hospital, government buildings already planned in there. Generally, we don't see that, and that's why all the traffic issues or the congestion issues are there. But if you plan it right from the start, your road infrastructure, your commercial buildings where they will be coming is planned right from the start. You won't face that issue as we feel that we have over here in Lahore. Taking out these choking points from Lahore and putting it in a more vibrant and developed community would also help. So this is more of a twin city concept where we're actually having a twin city right over here with more planned and developed policies and procedures, as well as regulations that are in place. Also helping Lahore in terms of the transportation links that will be supporting over here. Other things like some of the choking points in Lahore that is already there, we're also taking that to RRUDP and making it more and more friendly for the city. For example, the fruit and vegetable market of Badami Bagh. The study that we did with PAMRA, which is the Agriculture Department authority who deals with all the fruit and vegetable market, it's a business of around 40 to 50 billion per annum. Is currently situated in a very, very bad situation in about 300 canals inside Badami Bagh, and there are 15,000 trucks that are coming in every night. And that creates all the hazards on the roads and traffic issues that we feel now. We are actually relocating it to Kala Khatai. We're inaugurating, inshallah, in this month. And it's a planned fruit and vegetable market on 2,400 canals that we have planned for them. Including cold storages, and we are getting all the technical support from Rangis, which is the French vegetable and fruit market, and they're going to train the staff over there of PAMRA as well of how to manage it. Economy would definitely thrive with this. We're looking for a $40 billion support that this project, this city will provide alongside Lahore economy when once inshallah it is built, same way as we are planning to do it. As I mentioned earlier, the environmental aspects must always be supported. We're very open to ideas. Any support that is coming from the group will always be taken positively. We'll try to improve ourselves as much as we can. We don't expect any investors or any people to come over there and invest in RRUDP with the current condition of the river that we have over there. I'm very pleased that yesterday we had a group visited the site that we are working on, and they would have seen the earthen embankment that we have developed over there with Ravi. And inshallah, by next year, December, you will see both these sites as a proper waterfront. We're starting our first barrage as well. And that is around a kilometer from the LSM downstream, which will have a capacity of around 177 billion. For the funding, we have a very little, or you can say no reliance on the government funding for this project. We're working with the community, with the developers that are already there, to follow the master plan, develop centralized places over there, and pay a fee which is called TPID, that's a trunk development charges for this city, because the city is for everyone. And we had numerous sessions with them as well. We had a lot of resistance from these developers who were already there, didn't want to spend any, but thankfully we had big groups who have now joined in and are helping us financing and funding this project. And they're also aware that the priority of the authority is first to go towards the infrastructure part of it and then the development part of it.
When we start spending money disproportionately on Lahore, which we have been doing consistently, it means that public money that should really be spent in those areas which don't have the capacity to raise their own revenues, those areas are being deprived. So if you are depriving those areas to build Lahore's infrastructure, and this is not just about Lahore, this is about general Lahore, overall Lahore. if you are depriving the low-income areas of Punjab by improving the infrastructure of Lahore, by using the pool, the aggregate pool, rather than generating your own money, then those people have to sit at the table also to decide whether we should do projects like RRUDP.
Well, one thing is that, so the Supreme Court had stayed construction on the project other than on the 2,000 acres of land that was already acquired. So I'm curious to know the legality of the existing construction that's going on and how that's going on. And then finally, I have a question on the master plan.
Have those massive floods like you did in the old days, because so much of it gets used up. There are also protections on the Indian side. And secondly, that there are also flood mitigation measures on the Indian side, and then there is a, if I recall, under the Indus Water Treaty, you're supposed to provide notice of releases and things like that.
हो भी नहीं सकता था। अगस्त में अथॉरिटी बनी थी, एरिया दिया गया था जिसकी बाउंड्रीज थी, मगर डिटेल प्लान नहीं था, बिकॉज 4-6 महीनों में डिटेल प्लान तो मेरे ख्याल में बनाना शुरू भी नहीं हुआ था। सो दैट वाज अनदर हाई कोर्ट का जो उस वक्त था कि आप किस प्लान के ऊपर काम कर रहे हैं। सो प्लान की बाउंड्रीज दी गई थी बिकॉज वो एरिया ऑलरेडी मुख्तस था कि आप इससे बाहर नहीं। दिस इज द स्पेसिफिक एरिया ऑफ रूडा दैट वाज देयर, सेक्शन 4 के तहत उसको लगाया गया था एंड दैट वाज देयर, बट उस वक्त डिटेल प्लान नहीं था।
But do we need a mega real estate project to address this? Now, this would mean that we don't want to tap the government money. We have to address these critical challenges because they are so important. All the points which Imran Saab mentioned that RRUDA wants to do, as an environmentalist, I'm telling you, they are critically important. They must have been. Who has stopped the government or the local government or the politicians or the policy and decision makers that after more than 70 years, we can't treat a single drop of wastewater of Lahore? Who has stopped them? What was the role of WASA? Why does WASA collects all this revenue if they can't provide safe drinking water or provide good sanitation facilities to the citizens of Lahore? So it's not that we don't need to treat our, we must treat our wastewater, period.
So what this means is that when you're taking these people and removing them out of this place, how, by giving them market compensation, how are you rehabilitating them for their entire lifetime's earnings? Because agriculture is not something that is just going to be your land value today. It's going to give you income for the rest of your life. And that is something that's the potential value of the land that is not being considered. And that's why you have farmers kind of up in arms. So this reserve forest, you cannot in any situation, except if you have really come to the conclusion that there's no possible alternative, can you remove reserve forests. Unfortunately, reserve forest legislation in Pakistan is not strictly implemented. Recently, they denotified part of a reserve forest in Nathia Gali to build a DoubleTree by Hilton in the UBA National Park. Which is
there are so many questions. And then, because you're not taking money from the government, but you ask the private sector. The real estate is the real estate in this country. The private sector is putting money. Where, I mean, Data साहब तो नहीं है ना को पैसे दे रहे हैं. वो अगर उन्होंने $100,000 लिया, वो 500,000 return planned होगा. And who's going to stop them? Look at what's happened at IPP. The commitments that we made with IPPs. You make the investment and we will pay you back. What's happening? At our cost, we are paying back to IPPs even if their projects are shut. Even if they come up with these mega structures, even if they are not able to, sell them, who's going to pay?
And just imagine the pressure that the city is facing. Another point that we always fail to recognize is that the colony of Gulbarg was a 12 canal and a 36 canal plotting area where 4 to 6 household people were to live in that household with about 3, 4, 5 servants. So a total of 10 people were to stay in those 12 or 36 canal plots, and the infrastructure was made accordingly. Today, we have started developing high-rises there, where we've got 400 people living in a 4 canal plot. And we've got, instead of 2 cars or 3 cars that were initially planned, today if we've got 400 people, at least 40, 50 cars there. And probably they're going to have more eventually. Just imagine the sort of pressure that we are creating without even imagining what we are trying to do. have less water.
There is a basic fundamental legal issue in terms of RUDA as to what is the master plan. Because if there was no master plan, then how do you approve this project? You can't have a project first and a master plan later, and they've tried to resolve it by saying, well, that master plan is deemed to have been approved, but I'm not going into that. To that extent, RUDA has a legal issue, it needs to deal with that. But ultimately, that's a procedural issue. You need to go through a process. You need to come up with a plan. It needs to be done well. People will do it. You need to get the right kind of experts, and you need to interact with this government entity which is going to be there so that it does a reasonably good job. But of all, there is also, as I said, coming back to this point, there is this undertone here of, we don't want this to happen at all. And that connects in particular to, for example, land usage. Now you keep on saying that, this is prime agricultural land. Prime agricultural land is, people would rather sell it. That's what the market is there for. If you get money today for your land, that represents a certain amount of money. You take it because you think you can go use that money for something else and do better with it. Now, if you say that the government, and this is a structural point which I'm sure Ms. Qadir would make, that if the government sets the price at DC rate, that's an unfair price. But what has been happening in the Sapphire Bay project that I know of is that people are being offered the DC rate plus a plot on top of that, which is currently worth about 4 million. So they get about close to 6 million for their acre, whereas even the market rate right now is about 4 million. So people are selling of their own free will, which comes back again to my point. If you did not have RUDA, you will have what you had there before. You had small, unregulated housing societies making, projects which were not up to good standards, which were not in accordance with law, which did not have the proper facilities, which did not have sewerage, etc., etc., etc. And again, the point was made about high density urban. Yes, we would all like that. But to get to high density living, you first need to get into the governmental apparatus. You need to legislate some degree of high density construction, and then you need to find greenfield projects to do it on. Because as we were told, Gulberg was originally plotted for 12 canals and for 36 canals. And you cannot retrofit the infrastructure necessary to have high density living in something which was originally built for low densities. You've had problems in Karachi.
And lastly, RUDA operates on the Supreme Court stay order. After the 208-page decision of the Lahore High Court, an appeal was filed to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, at that point, the two judges were Justice Ijazul Ehsan and Justice Mazahir Ali Naqvi, both of whom gentlemen have resigned, one subsequently in disgrace. An appeal that was filed without a number, without notice to the parties in opposition. हमें तो सोशल मीडिया पे पता चला था कि मंडे को केस लगा हुआ है, भागे भागे गए। वहां सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा कि आप जिस इलाके पे एक्विजिशन कर चुके हैं, तकरीबन 4000 कनाल एकड़, उस पे आप डेवलपमेंट करें, मजीद एक्विजिशन नहीं हो सकती। उस स्टे ऑर्डर पे अब रूडा चल रहा है, and you're still bringing in investors. This is a fraud on investors.
The flooding in the Ravi Plain has been mentioned several times. There is a hydrologist there, there are people here. When you do an urban project, there are ways to calculate. Hamad Sahab is also a trained engineer. There are ways to calculate what the maximum flood is. So either people need to go into those calculations and say your calculation is wrong because you've taken the wrong data, and also you have to mention the fact that India pure ka pura pani leke ja raha hai. It's not going to happen, but so there needs to be to the extent that there is interaction, it has to be a bit more constructive than hi agar kal ko salab aa gaya. Let's look at the real numbers here.
Across the board, rich or poor, black or white, young and old, biodiversity, animal, whatever it may be, it is about the planet. We are on a trajectory to self-destruct, and it is never too late to reverse the course, to have a better life for all.